Okay, practice indie, fam jam. This could possibly be the most entertaining or the weirdest episode we have so far. I have the delight of bringing on Shannon K, one of my dearest, most favorite people on the planet Earth. She's just, if you're listening on the podcast, you need to pause, pull your car over, pull up the YouTube, and gaze at her beautiful face. She's majesty. She's poise, she's grace, and she's brilliance. And she and I are going to talk about Hridaya, which this is very appropriate because we love each other so much. Hridaya is the true heart, and I'm going to let Shannon share all the different titles she holds, but she is a faculty member on our 300-hour staff specific to anatomy, so she has the actual credentials to discuss the anatomy of the heart. And then I'm going to sprinkle made up shit in between. So that's how it's going to go. So Shannon, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm Shannon, the other Shannon. I teach at IUPUI. I teach human anatomy, physiology, and biology of women, which is hands down my favorite class. I am also a chiropractor. I practice out of my home here, but I was able to live in Australia for a year and a half, practiced in St. Louis. And then I was able to meet Shannon, and it was amazing. And I love her dearly, and she brings me away from the academic world because sometimes I get caught in this black and white, this is it, this is textbook, and I should not do that. So Shannon always brings me back down to what reality really is.
Well, I think before we share, or you share, me listen, what the heart is, the function of the heart, and we're really going to talk about the actual science of that, and then again I'm going to sprinkle in some bullshit. I think it's valuable to share that we're going to share to the limit of our knowledge. Correct. My made up knowledge, your real knowledge, and then we kind of talked before this that sometimes that's how theories are created, is just like expanding on something maybe we don't know, we haven't proven yet. I think what's really great about the two of us working together is we're always very honest about, like, here's what I do know, here's me speculating. And when we're talking about something like the heart, which there's obviously science to the heart, but there's also this mythological, philosophical aspect that, like, I don't know that we could ever prove, but we can take the science and we can pair that up with a lot of the lore around the heart and see how the heart has become this this symbol for so many things. And that might not line up as scientifically as what you're going to share, but I think it speaks to the human experience, and it is a conflict of interest in terms of, like, the facts of being human and then the experience of being human, and sometimes they line up, sometimes they're in stark contrast. So tell us a little bit about the anatomy of the heart.
I will. So the heart itself has 4 different chambers. And we don't really need to go into the names of them specifically, but what the heart's trying to do is bring back deoxygenated blood. So your tissues use up this oxygen, and then you have this deoxygenated blood that comes back to the heart. Okay, and as it goes through the heart, it's basically going to be pumping. It's working as a pumping system. Okay, so we're going to enter the right side of the heart and eventually pump out of the heart into the lungs, where it then picks up oxygen. So that oxygen that you breathe in, you're going to pick it back up, you'll bring it back to the left side of the heart, and then eventually it's going to pump it back out to the rest of the systemic system to provide your tissues again with oxygen. And this whole cycle is constantly repeating itself.
Can we live without the heart?
Actually, yes, you can. I don't know for how long, but there is it's a thing called, one of the ways would be like ECMO, and what they'll do in hospitals for whatever reason, if the heart's not working properly or the lungs, they'll kind of divert the blood and they'll pull the blood out, take it into a machine that oxygenates this blood and then brings it back to the heart. And so it's kind of diverging that.
What do you, if you were to rank the heart in terms of, like, importance of organs, one being most important, let's just go to like 3 or 4. 4 being less important. Where would the heart fall on that?
I'm gonna go 1 or 2. That's based off my
Yeah.
like initial. That's how I feel initially, and I think I should go with that.
What would
Brain and spinal cord being another very important one.
Okay, so interesting, because the brain, from the yogic perspective, the brain is what's going to house 2 critical things. One, our consciousness, and the other, our ego. So our consciousness is ultimately what we're trying to access, our higher awareness, but our ego tends to take that over. And then the spinal cord is specifically in like asana, physical yoga. That's what we're the most interested in, because that 6 movements of the spine, or we could argue many more, many less, but the movements of the spine are what keep the spine healthy. And so that's like, the agency of the human body. So we've got the mind and the agency of the mind. We've got the spinal cord, which is the agency of the physical movement of the body. And then you've got the heart, which, so you're saying its main interest is to regulate oxygen, right? To go in and out and to send blood to the body. So what does that do? Like, what do you think the heart is the motor for? Like, why do we have the heart?
So it can pump the blood, which carries the oxygen and also nutrients throughout the body too. Okay, so it's going to be pumping just the blood. It's also doing within the blood, the white blood cells, which is part of our immune system. Okay, so it's constantly just transferring things, and it's essentially a pump. It's beautiful and it's great, but it really is just a pump, pumping the blood, deoxygenated, and then picking up oxygen and then carrying the oxygenated blood. It's very important, but it's a pump.
So we talked a little bit about the heart is the first organ, yes or no, that develops in the embryo. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Which I remember all of our ultrasounds. That is, man, that's like a crippling moment. If you ever if you're ever pregnant and you go and they're doing the ultrasound, which I've had many. When we had our first miscarriage, there was something, to your point, it's a pump, right? Mm-hmm. And you're looking on this screen, and even now as I'm talking about, I can feel it in my heart, which is so wild. Mm-hmm. I'm looking up at the screen, I know I'm pregnant, and there's this little bean in there, and there's no like flicker. The pump isn't pumping, and the ultrasound tech kind of looks at me, and then she looks at the screen, and she takes a step back, and we could comment on a lot of things about how women's health is not always very empathic, but she did her best, and she said, I don't see a heartbeat, let me go get the doctor. And I think that holds such significance, because it is a pump and there's so much more. So can you speak to like the electrical impulses, or you had talked a little bit about, you'd seen the research of like 2 embryonic cells, maybe heart cells. Can you talk about like the rhythm that they create or the connection they create?
Yeah, one of the crazy things is it's autorhythmic, so it sets its own pace. So nerve impulses travel around our body, and they send little messengers telling what to do, but the heart doesn't need that. It sets its own heart rate. Okay, so there's a Sinoatrial Node, or SA node, which is known as the pacemaker of the heart. And through these electric activity, which is what you'd see on an EKG showing the PQRS wave. So that's like electrical signals that are being sent. So it sets that itself. And then that depolarization wave is going to be sent down to another node known as the AV node. And then that's going to be sent down through the ventricles, which causes those to contract. So you've got the beginning with the SA node that fires on its own, which causes a wave of depolarization, which is actually what makes the atrial contract, which is then going to pump the blood to the ventricles. And then that wave of depolarization is going to carry down, eventually causing those ventricles to contract. And it's really fascinating because it will have a pause, and it's an important pause because it needs to be able to finish that atrial contraction to get all of the blood to the ventricles before then the ventricles contract. And that's like the sciencey part of it, which the terminology for my students is important, but this, I like to see big picture. So what's going on here? There's these impulses that are telling the heart to beat, and they also built in these perfect little pauses so that the blood can completely exit the atrium, fill up the ventricles, and then those are going to pump, and the right ventricle is going to go to the lungs, and the left ventricle is going to go to the systemic circulation. And I think it's important for my students and people to know that although when you follow the pathway of the blood, it looks like we're going in one direction, but these are all pumping at the same time. So both atria contract at the same time, both ventricles will then contract at the same time. It's just blood's going to the lungs from the right ventricle and blood's going to the systemic circulation from the left.
Damn. She busy. She, he, they, I don't know. Maybe my heart has a different pronoun than my own.
Is your heart beating fast now?
No, now it's really slow. It's really not, I don't know. Something's very soothing to me about hearing you speak about science. Not sure.
Oh, honestly, at one point I looked at your face and you did just look very soothed. You love it. This is what you need to be doing, Shannon.
I do. I think the body is just, side tangent, but I was an atheist for a while, and yoga is really what brought me back to whatever bastardized version of religion I carry currently. And it's because of the body. Like, the body is, the fact that all of that is going on at the heart at the same time. The pauses are really fascinating to me, because one of my best music teachers said the greatest pieces of composed music are because of the rest. Like, it's because of cultivated pauses or silences that actually make the music what it is. It's not always a selection of notes. It's how we break in between. So I think that's really interesting that you brought that up, because I think that the pause of the heart, the holding of the heart, the moment the heart wasn't beating for my not existent child was a big moment for me to then like appreciate the beating of the hearts of the two children I have now. So I think that is, again, like this weird tangle of science and feeling that is significant, that it, I'm sure there are things in the body that probably run all the time, but there's a significance that our heart has like a pause built in.
And I like to, and I make sure that I actually throw this on my exams, is like, yes, it's autorhythmic and it sets its own heart rate, but that doesn't mean that we can't use biofeedback to help change the heart rate a little bit by doing things, i.e. yoga, meditation, etc., can help to calm and slow that heart rate down.
So as maybe a little bit more from your chiropractic world,
yes,
or maybe from your academic world, what do you see are the main problems with people's hearts? And or maybe something that lay people like myself don't know about our hearts in relationship to our health that is worth considering or learning more about?
I just finished reading the book called State of the Heart, and he talks a lot about inflammation, one being an issue with the heart, and also blood pressure. So we just changed, like in 2017, I think, the guidelines for blood pressure being like normal, elevated, stage 1, stage 2, and they're actually lowering the threshold to where what used to be in the 140 was, I think, stage 1, and now it's moving to was stage 2, and now that's moving to a stage 1 perspective. So we're lowering that threshold because they're acknowledging how high blood pressure is really affecting people. So you imagine you're pumping so hard, you're actually causing micro injuries to these blood vessel tissue layers. And it's that micro injury that causes inflammation and will carry on, and eventually through this complex process will build up these plaques, will either cause, stenosis or hardening of the vessels. And that within itself is going to further perpetuate the high blood pressure, further perpetuate the inflammation. And then now we're making the heart work harder. So when the heart works harder, just as if you go to the gym and you work out, you're going to get increased muscle, but we don't really need this heart to increase its muscle too much, because specifically in the ventricles, as we start to make that heart work harder than it should, because it's pushing blood against either blood vessels that are narrow or stiff, etc., you're going to increase that ventricle tissue. And then what's that going to do is decrease the size of the ventricle. And now there's not as much blood that's able to go into the ventricles, nor is there as much blood as it used to be being able to be pushed out from the ventricles. So you get yourself into situations where you don't have as much oxygen supply or blood supply to the tissues. I kind of think I went on a tangent when I started talking about that.
No, that I think that's very helpful. So what, you know, the general things I think people like me, lay people know, are like eating a healthy diet, which that's its own bag of worms. Eating a healthy diet, exercising. You know, I've also heard, because I have heart disease in my family on both sides. I've also heard there's nothing you can do about it. Like if you have high blood pressure, like you just have to be on medication. And you can't eat your way into a healthy heart. You can't exercise your way into a healthy heart. What is your opinion on that, or what would be your general guideline to people to keep their blood pressure? What's normal, by the way? What would be a normal range of blood pressure? And
so 120, so blood pressure itself, like when you hear someone say 120 over 80, what that really means is when that's the pressure, the higher number is the pressure exerted when the heart's contracting, versus the lower number is there's still being a pressure exerted when the heart's relaxing. So 120 to 120 over 80 is that quote unquote normal, but they're really pushing the threshold. And I just pulled it up just to make sure. So elevated now is, so this is considered elevated, 120 to 129, and a diastolic less than 80. So yeah, 128 over 80 is fine, but we're lowering that threshold. So it's making it harder for people to not fall into a category that is considered hypertension. So I can't speak necessarily to the medical drugs, because it really depends. I like the heart, so I listen to some podcasts about it sometimes, and there's a lot of doctors that will say depending on if you have other risk factors, diabetes, it runs in your family, etc., putting these people on statins early. Now, my opinion of that, I mean, I don't know. You look at the things of non-modifiable versus modifiable age, genetic history versus the modifiable things. When I have women who come in and tell me they're osteoporotic, and they're thinking, one, it's a big word to them. They don't know what the hell that means. They would never had it explained to them. And they think that that's it. That's a death sentence. And I will tell them there's so many things that you can do. There's a ton of muscles that surround your joints that you can help to strengthen them, to take the pressure off. You can do things to help yourself. So I don't know if that's just my personality or if I'm wrong when I say this, but I wouldn't ever just say that, oh, I've got bad genes. That's it. See you later. Again, that's more of an opinion base.
I mean, you know, most of what I say is opinion based. I think, you know, what you said about the osteoporosis, though, is my experience of going back to pregnancy, because it's the only time I've ever been hospitalized, is, you know, like when you go in to deliver, they start taking your blood pressure and checking for fetal distress and all that. And they'll call out to the patient your blood pressure, right? And like where you're at. And I'm a pretty educated person, I would think.
You very much so.
I had no fucking clue what they were saying to me and what it meant, you know, like, because when one of my children, when they were born, who knows, I was under more stress, and you know, they were calling out my blood pressure and then saying like, are you experiencing any more stress than normal? I'm like, I'm having a fucking baby. I'm very stressed at what's about to occur. But you know, like, I think a lot of people don't actually know when somebody reads you your blood pressure. They don't know what that means.
Correct.
And it's usually said in a very matter-of-fact way, like, well, you're 120/80 or whatever, and you're like, mm-hmm. But you don't really know.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? And on a day-to-day basis, I guess what I'm hearing and in relationship to yoga is that it's just like anything else, it's a constant management, because your heart, as you're saying, like, we want to work that muscle, right? We want to work that muscle, but we want to work that muscle without extreme resistance, like the narrowing of, what would be narrowing?
The arteries, the valves, just depends on where you're building up that plaque, we'll say.
Yeah, and I think like that in itself, so we're talking about true heart, and the heart in general, I think, is something that we just kind of, if you have the privilege of not having heart disease, or you have the privilege of having like baseline health, I don't think you often consider like what you're putting your heart through. And I think we could partly, people die of a broken heart all the time, but if you think about the kind of stress that puts on somebody, or the kind of tension that their physical and emotional heart is working through, that maybe they just can't, there's an impasse, just like, the narrowing of an artery. I think there's a lot to the emotional aspects of the heart, because even when we talk about the heart, we talk about things of the heart. You will feel it in your heart. There's that like constriction and release, which again, it's a pump. I think it's just very interesting. I don't know that I'm going to arrive at a conclusion, but I do think it's very interesting how the heart functions, how little most people know about their hearts, and how important it is. It's this metronome that's always going. We talk about the breath a lot in that way too, that, we just take it for granted. But I think there are things that, just like breath practices, like we need to cultivate our breath in order to improve it and be able to manage it better. I think there are things you can do from a heart perspective. Me as a yoga teacher, I know, like, helping people reduce stress by taking deeper breaths, by taking rest, by exercising within reason, by eating healthy, again, whole nother thing. But are there any other things you wish, like, or that you share with your students about heart health and managing your heart, that you wish everybody knew?
Yeah, I make sure the last chapter in my women's biology class is women and stress, and we just talk a lot about stress and the impact that can have on the heart. So heart disease is the #1 killer, and it's not that heart disease wasn't occurring or we didn't have plaque building up years and years ago. It's just years and years ago we were dying of other things because we didn't have the technology we have now. We were dying of infections, etc. So now we're living longer. So this heart disease is kind of a lifelong process. So women's are a little bit more protected because of estrogen, etc. But I think it's important I stress, like, being stressed, I think, specifically work is one of the highest ones that damages your heart. And it's a way that you actually can control if you do things, because you and I, Shannon, have talked about calming, parasympathetic, and really engaging that. And if we don't shake through this sympathetic cycle, so that's how you can affect the heart, is calming it down. Food, again, is a whole nother thing, but I really harp on stress and what that can do to the heart, because then you're putting yourself in a constantly heightened stage. If you're in sympathetic, that sympathetic kicked on is going to increase your heart rate. Well, if you're constantly living in this fight or flight stage, you're constantly making that heart beat faster, putting more damage to the blood vessels in the heart, causing those micro injuries, causing that inflammation, causing that buildup, and it's just this vicious cycle. So maybe I'm biased, but I think more time needs to be spent on focusing on stressors in life and how you can manage those stressors.
Just as a hypothetical, is there any positive to, because like stress in itself is a necessary function of the body, right? Like,
correct.
Stress response on purpose. It's a useful mechanism. are there healthy stressors? Like, are there things that help build the heart in a healthy stress? I'm assuming exercise is one of those.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I was gonna say, yeah, exercise. It's I think the thing is we stay in this heightened stage, and again, I've talked about this in anatomy, is we see we have a stressful situation which ignites our whole stress response, and we kick on this sympathetic drive, and then we never complete that cycle, because then the next thing we do, we have another stress, whether that's like work related or relationship related, or we're on to the next thing, or we're constantly doing that, and then maybe we're feeding ourselves with things that aren't going to help the situation, so we're never completing the cycle, or we're not doing it as much. So you nailed it, stress is a good thing. The sympathetic nervous system is a good thing, and so is the parasympathetic nervous system. It's just when we have an imbalance of these two systems that we run into problems, and we don't make it a priority to kick on our parasympathetic nervous system. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, and I think it brings it full circle, because again, I don't know enough to draw strong conclusions. I think we could probably read Joseph Campbell and arrive at a lot of like mythological, philosophical reasons for why the heart is so emblematic of love and of deep feeling. There's so much there that I don't have enough about, but I can say that right now, talking to you, talking to Dr. Devin Banks and a few others, and just reading a lot, I think 2020 has brought an overwhelming sense of stress and grief. As we go into the winter, I guess what I'm hoping for people, and my assumption on how to help the heart and how to move back into balance with the heart, is for us to allow ourselves to complete that stress cycle. Today has been, for me, a bad mental health day, and I've just been tired, and normal, pre-COVID me would have pushed through. And this really has helped me awaken to maybe what I need to do is rest. Maybe what I need to do is complete the stress cycle, instead of trying to push through, instead of adding another scar and another layer to my stress portfolio, if you will. Maybe what I need to do is watch movies and just sit down. And I think as we move into winter, and I'm getting increasingly more nervous about people's metaphorical state of heart, metaphorical state of mind, that maybe, like just giving ourselves permission to complete the stress cycle, to do things that are healthy for our hearts, to do things that are healthy for our minds, is ultimately going to bring us back maybe closer to balance. I don't know that any of us can be balanced right now, but balance is what I hope for.
Well, one of the things that I think, and I'm sure they've been doing this research longer than I've known about it, but I find it super fascinating, specifically in women, as that's what I teach. So I kind of emphasize my knowledge on that. But they found women that have reported feeling lonely or disconnected have a 50% increased risk of heart disease. That's just reporting loneliness and feeling of not being socially connected. So that's where I, in my classes, probably steer away from the academic world, but I think that stuff matters. And if my students can acknowledge that, that's going to be so important for them to know. I kind of wish I knew that at a younger age, where they're 18, 19, 20.
Yeah, that's insane.
And specifically with COVID right now, that's some of the problem with quarantine, and you're not having that social engagement, you're not having that community that you used to. And if you don't have a roommate, or you're not in a safe environment, I mean, that's a whole other tangent that I don't know we planned on going, but that comes back to the heart. That is perceived as stress, which is going to increase your blood pressure, which is, again, I won't say it again, but what that's going to do. I'll spare you from that, Shannon. Even though I think your face, you're just like, I'll never forget the time that I placed that brain in your hand and you.
I was like, that was one of the best days of my life.
You did say that. You might have compared it close to holding your child, but I won't ever tell Langston and Mags that you said.
I'll only show this video to them when they are being a-holes to me. I'll just fast forward to this and just be like, by the way, I held a brain and it was equitable to your birth. Same feeling. Don't get so cocky. Sure. So I'll be playing it for them tomorrow. I so appreciate you and your genius. And I think so I've gone down the rabbit hole of lots of documentaries over the last 6 months. And what I conclude from those is that it is a third of people's actual knowledge, and then 2/3 of people's theory and opinions passed as 100% fact. So what I appreciate about you, and what I appreciate about this conversation, is that you always share what you know, and then you don't cross the boundary of what you don't know. And I was sharing with you before this, like, I think also I listen to a lot of podcasts. I think a lot of podcasts are so well staged that you feel like you're getting the full picture, and really you're just getting a sliver. So I appreciate that this conversation had reality of like, this is what the heart is, this is what it does. And also like that there's so much that we will never know about the heart. There's a reason we can't study it all. There's mystery in life that's intentional, I think.
Right.
And that's what keeps it interesting. And if we knew it all, then why would we keep going?
Yeah.
So,
and what we know now could change. I mean, when they first found out about high blood pressure, they thought it was a good thing. It should be untouched. We need to have that response. So that's obviously completely changed. So I keep that in mind, of what we know to be true now may not be what we know to be true 10, 20, 30, 100 years from now. But I love that you just when I'm starting to step into the complete dark side of academic and textbook, you suck me back in, and I love it because I need to exist in this world.
Well, we hope this is a plug for something that's not completely out yet, but Shannon does help with our 300-hour and our anatomy, and we hope to be doing something with that. Or I think it would be cool to do a layperson's anatomy class, something that people who maybe you took it in college or you never took it in college, but learning like basic anatomy. That has been an access point to me for spirituality in the weirdest way, because the body, the heart, I mean, they're just fantastic. And there's as much science as you can give me, and as much as I love and appreciate that, there's also no explanation for why they are so intricate and how they come to be. I think that's what's so beautiful about studying anatomy, is that you find this entire labyrinth of unending possibilities and questions, even through like very strong science.
I think we should put it out into the world too, that eventually we can just travel around and co-teach yoga / anatomy all over the world.
Right, it's there.
We'll bring our children and our wife and husband.
And if you have any questions about that, don't ask, because we're in a polyamorous relationship. You're not allowed to ask questions about it.
Oh boy, giving our children a complex.
Oh boy. Well, I love you so much. Thanks.
I love you so much. I'm not gonna lie, we kept this a lot more tame and less weird than we could. So
yeah, I'm impressed, actually.
We're maturing.
Do it over. Love you.
Love you so much.
People to reach out to you, keep in touch with you. By the way, complete plug. Shannon has adjusted my back twice now, both times. Have been when I didn't want to admit I needed help, and was on kind of the last straw of safety, and Shannon completely saved me. So if you need an in-home chiropractor, she's a genius. Are there ways you would like for people to connect with you or contact you?
Yeah, Instagram or even email. So Kuhn, KUHNS @iu.edu, or Instagram, but I can't say I post anything medically relevant or academically relevant.
You post a lot of really important things for the heart based off of dogs. You're beautiful.
Scaring people.
And scaring people, which also
our fiance.
The scaring people is another topic of like stress.
But the thing is, I think I help them complete that cycle. Scare them, sympathetic, they scream, completes, gets it out, move on.
Okay.
So that's going to be my theory. That is my theory.
Okay. Because my dad used to do really big scaries, and I know it's coming, that you're going to scare me one day, but I don't know. I don't know how long it will take for me to forgive you. I just want to give you like a heads up. Like,
Okay.
I think it might be a few minutes, and it'll probably be the first time we'll ever have an argument. So just
Okay.
prepare.
Well, it won't keep me from doing it because I know, as always, we'll find our way back to each other, and I'll have this great memory of the time I scared you.
God, I love you.
You are on my list. I love you. You are on my list. Caitlin Beisco is also on my list, and I hope she hears
I don't
this.
want to care for that. Actually, she's a good sport. She's a way better sport than I am, so she'll be fine. I'm nervous about me. All right, I love you.
Love you.
Kelly in here? There she is.
Do you have other people on this call, or is it just you two? Because if I were on this call, I'd been vomiting. Obsessed.
Oh my God. Well,
Let's end on that.
Okay.
Someone's jealous, so I need to go calm her heart.